Welcome everyone, my name is Brendan Snyder. Thank you for joining me. Today we're going to take a look at two Yes albums that are generally considered to be the worst in Yes's catalog. Now I find that really funny because I actually enjoy both of these a lot. Union, which came out in 1991, is actually one of my favorite records in their catalog. It may just have been, of course, when I came into the band, which was in the 80s, but we're also going to take a look at 1997's Open Your Eyes, and we'll compare those two. But I think before we can do that, we need to do a quick context check and run through a little bit of their history. Now, this is going to be a whirlwind run through of it. They're certainly not going to cover everything here. They've had so many members, and so much has gone on within their career that's been going on for 50 plus years now. But I do want to run through this to give a little context. So they formed in London in 1968, and they released their first album in 1969. Now, one of the most successful early albums was the 1971 album Fragile that came out. Incidentally, this is a Japanese pressing of it that I have here, where Steve Wilson did a remix of this album and really brightened it up and livened this, and highly recommend it if you're not familiar with the Yes remixes that are done by Steve Wilson. Now, that album contained Roundabout, which is arguably their biggest hit, maybe only second to Owner of a Lonely Heart, and it went double platinum. But by 1979, with a dispute over finances, lead singer John Anderson and keyboardist Rick Wakeman left the group. And 1980 saw a new lineup bringing in Jeff Downes and Trevor Horn, and they released Drama. And unfortunately, that album and lineup didn't fare very well, and they split in 1982. Now, at that time, Chris Squire, the bass player and only consistent member through all the lineups of the group until his untimely death, he started to look to form a new group and was working with Trevor Rabin, and they were going to call this new group Cinema. Now, once John Anderson, the original lead singer, had heard the demos from Cinema, he offered to sing on these and joined them, and the record label at that time asked them to change their name back to Yes, with having a number of Yes men in the lineup. And so, of course, that led to 1983's 90125 release, their most successful album, including Owner of a Lonely Heart on it, that went all the way to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, and the album ultimately went triple platinum in the US. Now, by 1988, John was feeling stifled in the group by Trevor Rabin and left again, and then formed the Anderson Buford Wakeman Howe project, all of those guys being ex-Yes men. So, it's an album, a Yes album all in but name. They released that album in 1989, and then while working on material for a second release, John heard demos of what Yes was working on and offered to sing on them. And so the idea popped up at that time about merging the two groups, Anderson Buford Wakeman Howe and the current lineup of Yes, putting them together and creating a union, which subsequently led to the release of the 1991 album Union that we're going to be talking about in more detail here in just a little bit. But by 1984, the Union was over, and the original 90125 lineup recorded the Talk album. And so they pared down, they weren't those two lineups. And then following that, by 1996, original Yes men, including Rick Wakeman and Steve Howe, came back into the fold without Trevor Rabin in there and Tony Kaye, and did a reunion tour, and then released two albums, Keys to Ascension Volume 1 and 2. They were live albums that also had studio material. This here, called Key Studio, compiles all the studio material onto one album and was released in Japan as a single disc like that. And incidentally, that was produced by Billy Sherwood, who later becomes a member of Yes, and we're going to talk about when we get into the Open Your Eyes. Now, by 1997, Rick Wakeman decided, to leave the group at that point, and so they did bring in new Yes men, Billy Sherwood at that time, and so with that lineup, then they released the Open Your Eyes in 1997. And so that brings us up to the point of being able to talk now about these two albums. And so I'm going to jump back now so we can talk about the Yes album Union. Now, this was the 13th studio album, and it's an amalgamation of then current Yes and Anderson Buford Wakeman Howe project, which I previously talked about. Interestingly, Billy Sherwood did contribute to the album, playing guitar on it. And of course, later he replaces Rick Wakeman in 1997. So Billy Sherwood goes back to the Union days, maybe even a little before that. He was doing work with them for the Keys to Ascension project before actually joining them in 1997 for the Open Your Eyes. I just wanted to give a little background on him. But the band having openly stated that they did not like the production on the Union album. And it's also been noted that producer Jonathan Elias and associate producer John Anderson didn't see eye to eye during this time, and there was a lot of conflict. Also of note, 9 of the tracks come from Anderson, Buford, Wakeman, Howe, and 4 of them come from then current lineup of Yes. The lead single, Lift Me Up, was from Yes, and the follow-up single, I Would Have Waited Forever, was from Anderson, Buford, Wakeman, Howe. The single Lift Me Up topped the Billboard mainstream rock tracks, and the album did go gold, selling 500,000 copies in the US. And also, the Steve Howe guitar solo on the album Masquerade was nominated for a Grammy for Best Instrumental Rock Performance. So the album by no means was a failure. My conclusion on the album, that ultimately the material does feel not cohesive as a band, and I think at 14 tracks the album was too long to really digest properly. I think they also should have hired a producer who could have unified them better in the studio and really taken a stance on it. I also think that the full combined group, both Anderson, Buford, Wakeman, Howe, and Yes, should have written together in the studio and created some joint music. I think that really would have helped bridge the album. All right, next up, the Open Your Eyes album from 1997. This was their 17th studio album, and it grew out of a collaboration from Chris Squire and Billy Sherwood and their Conspiracy project. So again, you've got the Union album, which was really a collaboration that grew out of other things, and then you've got this album, which was a collaboration that grew out of other things. So again, not albums that were both recorded or written by the bands in the studio outright, and that may be why it leads to how people feel about these. This album entered at number 51 on the Billboard 200. It's also the lowest selling album of Yes's catalog. It's estimated to have only sold about 200,000 copies around the world, and it's also the worst rated album on the Rate Your Music website, and has been heavily criticized for its overproduction and non-prog rock sound. My conclusion on the album is that, I actually find the album very upbeat, catchy, and quite interesting in my opinion. I think it has more of a song-based feeling to it, like they were thinking of radio play but without the poppy 80s production sound on it. Top tracks on the album, in my opinion, are the second song, Open Your Eyes, I just think is stunning. It's actually one of my favorite tracks. Then there's Universal Garden and Fortune Seller, all really good songs. Check them out if you haven't listened to this album in a while. And I think perhaps the album might have too poppy of a sound for the overall fan base and needed a little more prog and a little bit more of that darker edge on it to have balanced it out with the poppier sound that the album is. And also, without a clear keyboard person on it taking over for Rick, I think it left a lot of people confused as to really what was going on with Yes at the time. And so that's my take on these two albums, 1991's Union and 1997's Open Your Eyes. I hope that the review sheds some light on why these might be considered the worst albums in Yes's catalog. I, for one, do not feel that they are the worst albums. I don't know which one might get that title on it, but I do think that this re-exploration of it here might open you up to going back and rechecking these albums out. I hope they do. Sheds a little bit of new light on them for you. All right, I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please remember to comment, like, and subscribe. Let me know your thoughts, and I hope everyone has a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.